Hey people, how's it going? Welcome to a London session recap for Eurodollar on Wednesday, the 14th of December 2022. So as some of you have probably seen, I posted in the Discord, I think it was on Tuesday morning, yesterday morning, that I don't think I'm going to be trading I know I'm not going to be trading for the rest of the year. My year is wrapped up. Typically I will trade in towards the very end of the year, or at least, leading up to Christmas. I'll just keep a loose eye on things, but I would have to see something extremely clean normally to want to get involved. Sort of the first few days of this week, we were stuck within this daily range, which we'll take a look at in a minute. And there's literally almost very high impact news every single day this week. So I just thought, you know what, the odds of me taking a trade are pretty slim. It's not going to be the best conditions. I'd rather just use that time to focus on, the end of year processes. Tidying up my journal, getting everything sorted and prepared, so I feel ready for next year. So still keeping an eye on the markets, still keeping a finger on the pulse, because you don't just want to take this time off, right, and then get into next year and feel pretty rusty. You want to keep your finger on the pulse and be in tune with the market as best as possible. Stick to your processes, get up on time, and remain disciplined. It's just that I'm not actually going to be looking to risk my capital in any positions. So last few days of price action were pretty dead. However, today is a little bit more interesting because yesterday we had the news kick us out of that range. And so let's just take a look at what is going on. So weekly, we have come into essentially this fresh weekly supply zone here. Daily structure is bullish. Obviously, we had that last break of structure there to the upside. Now, some of you may have classified this here as enough of a swing pullback, and that's absolutely fine if you did. To be honest, it probably keeps things a little bit easier if you did, just to keep structure nice and clean. But essentially, after this break, I am looking for a bit more of a sizable pullback compared to this little pause price action that we had here. But I've marked that as our internal structure, so you can see we had that IBOS, then we had a pullback back into the previous range, right, denoted by this green box, tapped into that demand. We didn't quite come down into a refined level, but we know that we don't need to. Right, so that reaction from supply was just to provide a bit of a pullback, and then we pushed up higher. So now we've come into this sort of more this extreme supply zone here, nested within the weekly zone. It's swept liquidity. It has some nice inducement here. Looks like a pretty decent zone. So potentially we could see a bit of a pullback. Who knows? Maybe we'll push up higher, right? And then we can start to zoom out and look for what the next levels in which price may potentially start to have a bit of a pullback from. So definitely shorts are what I'm favouring, obviously, as we're coming up into this level to start to play a bit of a pullback. But if you look at a daily candle like this is obviously how the daily candle closed. That to me does not scream out that now price is going to be ready to kind of have that pullback. A very, very sort of soft reaction from there. When you compare that to how when we came into this zone here, right, big, strong reaction, sort of reversal kind of there. Now, of course, I didn't follow through, but at least for the next couple of days, right, there are potentially some intraday short positions. Whereas when you see something like this, it's not always the case, but to me, it doesn't scream out that we're going to have this. I'd probably see maybe a bit of an intraday pullback, potentially tap into this demand zone here that caused the IBOS, but most likely that high is going to get taken. We'll push deeper into the zone, right? Collect more of the orders from within here, and then we're much more likely to see a bigger reaction or potentially that pullback. So that's kind of what my brain's thinking. A bit of a tap into here, maybe look for some intraday shorts, but really expecting price to push up and deeper before we see a bit more of a reaction if we're going to get one. But even then, any shorts, got to be careful. That order flow is heavily bullish and you're trading directly into this most recent internal demand range, and where we have this demand zone as well. So until we really kind of see that zone go, bearish change of character, and ideally we get a bearish IBOS as well, then we can start to potentially look to follow that bearish internal trend for a bit more of a sustained pullback before eventually that potentially changes and then we continue up higher. So to keep things a bit more succinct, we're tapping into daily supply, had a bit of a reaction, but probably expecting prices are going to push up a bit higher, liquidate the early sellers, and then potentially we may get a deeper pullback, but very cautious. We've got demand in the way, and this push order flow just could keep on marching through into the new year. 4-hour chart. So as we can see, swing structure is pretty much lining up with the daily internal structure in this instance. We did break out of the 4-hour range that we're within, right? So let's kind of talk through that price action a little bit over the last few days. So we initially had this swing pullback here on the 4-hour chart, right? Then we broke to the upside. We came into that previous daily supply zone we were just looking at. We're expecting a bit of a swing pullback. Now, the demand zones weren't that clean because, as you can see here, right, if you draw on that demand zone, it was mitigated, right? So you follow the demand chain, price moves up, comes into the next zone, right? Mitigates it, pushes away. So then when we're coming up into the steady supply, if the bullish order flow is going to continue, where is it going to continue from? You would probably think this most recent level here, right? We could draw it down to the inside bar. That would make sense, right? Following the mitigations, tap, back into demand, tap, back into demand. This zone would hold so that the bullish order flow isn't disrupted, and then we continue to the upside, and that's what ended up happening. I did think that maybe we'd pull a bit deeper and potentially come deeper into this main zone here, even though we'd already had a mitigation, but that didn't end up happening. As you can see, right, we had a bit of a pullback, and then the internal structure shifted bullish here, signaling that potentially price has finished that pullback, this demand is holding, and then we can expect that bullish order flow to continue, which it just about did. It was a bit messy for a couple of days at the start of this week, and then eventually news pushed it out, right? So you can see that larger swing move, the pullback, and a continuation. But within that, what do we get? We get the small internal structure of that pullback. That then shifts bullish to signal the end of the swing pullback, and then that bullish order flow remains intact until it takes out the weak swing high, right? Hopefully you guys should be starting to get very familiar with that systematic framework and that expectation that we use within our trading. So once we then got that next boss, what does that do? That gives us a new 4-hour swing range to work within, where this now becomes our new swing low, right? That's the lowest point of that pullback that led on to breaking that high. Okay, so happy days. We have a nice new clear swing range to work within, right? So after a 4-hour breaker structure, what do we expect? We expect a swing pullback. We have tapped into the edge of that daily zone, as we can see, and had a bit of a nice reaction here on the 4-hour chart. However, again, whenever I see something like this, it makes me a bit skeptical that that's going to be the move that's just going to pull straight back down. Of course, that can happen, but usually it's a bit of a tap into, sort of pullback. Early sellers then get trapped, and then that's the high that gets liquidated, especially when we have a refined 4-hour zone within here that we haven't tapped into yet. Right, we've literally just tapped the edge of a big daily zone. Typically, that'll be a bit of a tap. Then we'll come in, and then hopefully we get a bit of a bigger move like that. I'll just look left and show you the 4-hour zone. Quite a big 4-hour zone, actually. I haven't really refined it that much, but yeah. So that's really kind of where you would expect, or at least I would expect, there to be a high probability of that actual bigger pullback kicking in. But of course, it doesn't have to. So pretty simple for analysis, to be honest, coming into the session. When I look at this, it takes me about 2 seconds to kind of think what I'm thinking, which is we're bullish. Pullbacks can be taken down into the steady demand zone, where we have a nice 4-hour demand zone here. No inducement, and it didn't sweep, which is a bit of a negative, but following on all of these mitigations, I'd be more than happy to look for longs from within here to push up another level higher. So we can potentially look for shorts down into there this session. But I'd be very skeptical that, because of this high, it doesn't really look like the high that's going to be where we're going to get that pullback from. So potentially we can push up higher and then get a bit more of a sustained move, or potentially even a trend change. So if we take a look at the M15, ooh, don't do that. Alt-R, there we go. And then I'm just going to play price forward to roughly Frankfurt Open, about 6:30 GMT, around here. So M15 swing structure, as we can see, this was the low that took out the high, one big straight push up, and then that's our swing high. So pretty simple to draw on our swing structure. This is the 4-hour POI we're talking about, kind of an obvious target to try and play pullbacks down to, and then we can potentially look for longs from within here. If that is to happen. However, we have broken up with a ton of momentum. We pulled back a decent amount. It wasn't quite to the EQ. Let's mark on from the low to the high. Right, as we can see, we haven't pulled back to the EQ just yet, but we know we don't have to. Now, a few things here. When you see a big kind of straight, big push up from news, no inducement, this is what people refer to as inefficiency imbalance, fair value gaps. I know we don't cover this in the course, but essentially when you see a big straight push up like that, and there's no pullbacks, there's no demand zones from within here, very often when price pulls back, you can see price fill for that move. Now there's various theories as to why. For me, the most obvious reason would be is there's no demand here, right? So there's nothing to kind of support price, or at least anything obvious on this time frame. So very often when you get that, price can retrace these moves a lot. Like if we look at NFP from last week, let's see here, right? Big straight push down, and then it just retraces that move and then pushes up higher. Now, you don't just want to trade that and think it's always going to be filled. It's not as simple as that. It's more about, does the rest of the price actually make sense? Like, what's the logic here? Well, you can see here, yes, we had a strong movement down, but look at structure and look at supply and demand. Structure was a bit of a bigger range here, but it was bullish. And then that news simply pushed the pullback down into this 4-hour demand zone where we had, the M15 demand chain. It makes sense. We're going to come off this level. So we push into here, and now, you can expect price to trace that move and continue the overall trend. But yeah, it's more just a point of that. Typically, price will feel a lot of this, but it doesn't have to. Now, the other thing that made me skeptical about this high as well, in terms of that, well, sorry, I've got about 4 different points here I'm trying to speak about at once. Simplest way to explain this is usually the highest probable moves when you see price come in to pay that reversal, which will come into the zone, you'll get a bit of a pullback, right? Hopefully some nice obvious equals, or this high causes a low, and then price comes up and liquidates it. Then we get the IBOS to the downside, right? And then you usually see a bit more of a sustained move. But kind of when you get that big momentum in, a little bit of a tap and price pulling back, and then it comes up, and then we're looking to short it. Of course, this can play out, but I'm always a bit wary that usually that's the early sell. You get liquidated, and then we get the real move. And that's why if you look at my pre-session analysis, I was saying we've got that bearish IBOS here. Okay, so that's a very, very strong signal that we're going to get that deeper pullback, because now that internal structure can be respected, right? All of these strong highs, that causes a low, right? Strong high, that would cause a low. So when price pulls back, we expect it not to breach the high. That's why we then can follow that bearish order flow, right? Because we're trading with the strong structure, targeting down into here, and then that's when we expect that to potentially change. So yeah, in its most simplest form, and as we teach in the course, once you get that bearish IBOS, yes, that's the signal the swing pullback is very likely starting, and we can look to follow that to the downside. But it's not always as simple as that. Strong momentum to the upside, everything is heavily bullish. We've only just tapped into the edge of the daily zone. There's plenty of room for us to push up higher into the 4-hour zone. We haven't had a very, very clear liquidation yet. So that's why I was saying I'm very, very wary of trading short from here, okay? And other than that would literally be the only area I'd consider trading from with that current development. Either wait for price to come down to here, ideally wait for price to push up to here, then look for the shorts. But if you really want to trade this would kind of be the only area. Everything in here is where you want to stay away from this, okay? Yes, we've had a bullish change of character here, but in this instance, when you've got clear internal structure, a chock just signals the start and end of the internal pullback. So for me, when I see that chock, I don't think, okay, swing pullback over, now we're going for the swing high. I just think, okay, bearish IBOS, now we've had a bullish chock. That just signals that, we're having that internal pullback into this level. Then we can look for a bearish chock. Okay, that will signal the end of this internal pullback. And now we can look to target down towards the weak internal low, right? That's already that chock, signals to me. But yes, it is a bullish sign, but it doesn't mean that I necessarily want to start looking for long. So all of this price action in the middle, the Asian range, right? Price just trading sideways. I have no interest in trading that. This is where, like I keep saying, this is the only area in which I would consider trading from if I was looking to trade it. But even then, I'm a bit skeptical of it. So during sort of Frankfurt Open, we end up taking these Asian highs, very typical price action of what would happen. We get to sweep those highs, and then we come down, and do we sweep that low just now? Not yet. We kind of have those equal lows. Then we push down. Okay, so we get another sweep here. You can see the characteristics of price action also tell you, is it going to, because sometimes, right, price can come down and break that low, but you don't know, is that going to be a commitment and we go, or is it going to be a sweep for them to push up higher? Well, we don't always know, of course, until after the fact, but you can see the nature in which price has broken that low, right? It's broken the low and immediately retraced to the upside. So you can see how it looks like a sweep. Now, I know some people potentially looking at longs from within here. I'm not saying anything is right or wrong. I'm just explaining why, I wouldn't really be looking for longs here. And that's because, well, one, I'm expecting more of a swing pullback than not. I don't really see this as a high probable level to be looking for longs, even though I don't trust this high and I think we could be ready to go up higher. For me personally, it's just not enough probability here. Two, obviously we have bearish internal structure. And three, yes, we swept this high and then we pushed down lower. And now we swept this low and pushed up higher. But you do technically have M15 supply that caused that break to the downside, right? So it's like, do I really want to log against that? Well, I can see that this high can, how do I explain this? Like, I don't view this as high probable for looking for shorts, but that doesn't necessarily mean I want to trade through it either, because I can see it going either way, right? This is a high that caused that low. It's failed to cause price to close with that low. Now we're getting a sweep and coming to the upside, but I just see that as price ranging, price sweeping. It could go either way. It's not something I personally want to trade against. So this is where, again, I say just let price do its thing. And if you're still interested in shorts, then consider this area. At least that's how I would approach it. Price then pushes up higher, comes into the area, but ends up just blasting straight through. I don't believe there's even a single M1 chock from within here. The internal structure is now bullish. Okay, so now you have that sort of true confirmation that the swing pullback should now be over, because now we get that bullish IBOS. This then becomes that strong internal low because it's now done its job. So now our expectation is the internal structure will stay bullish until it takes out the week swing high. And that's it. So that was a bit of a long breakdown for something that, you know, you don't really have to overanalyze. Well, if you're kind of, I guess, as conservative as I am, I just see that considering the time of year, considering got high impact news later today, FOMC, considering I don't really view this as a high that's going to be the move to cause a big move because we've literally just tapped into the edge of the daily zone, no strong liquidation. This is where I think there's a much higher probable level in which we'll get a much more significant pullback or reversal. It makes sense to look for shorts from within here if we are going to get that continued pullback. So that's really the only area I'm interested in, but price gave no entry, it pushed straight up through. Yes, you could have been a bit more aggressive and looked for the intra-session longs from within here. Of course, I just wasn't interested because, you know, price could have easily just come into here and then gone like that. So it didn't really make much sense to me to do that. But hey ho, maybe I'm just a bit too conservative compared to you. But I'd rather, you know, just wait for something where I have real sort of high conviction in. So now we're pulling back a little bit. So yeah, like I said, with the framework that I use, that's now a strong internal low. So you could look for price to pull back into here, look for the long-term target that high. But to me, there's no really clear demand here. That's probably the clearest candle, but even then the next candle didn't close above it, which isn't ideal. And yeah, potentially that could play out. Potentially that could be the move. Potentially we could come lower again. Who knows? I just don't really like anything. And, you know, I'm mentally checked out for the year. For me to want to take something, I'd have to see something very clean. And an example of that would be like if we came into, I mean, even this is quite a big 4-hour zone. So it could be worth digging into and looking left and seeing if there's any clean, refined M15 zones within here. But like price coming in, nice big equals, liquidation, ideally an IBOS, bearish swing breaker structure would be even better, and then look for price to come into here, right, and then we can look for that bigger move, right? Something really obvious, not when it's like this and it's like 50-50 to me. Like that's where I'm happy to just keep my strike rate as high as possible, save your financial and mental capital for the right moment. So yeah, hope you guys took some value from that. Have a good week if you are trading it. But yeah, really just be really, you know, careful of the high impact news this week. And I'll see you next one. Cheers, guys.